Happy holidays and welcome to a special episode of The Hill Sunday, one that I confess is my favorite of 2025. Around Independence Day this year, we started a project, help Americans get ready to celebrate our 250th birthday in July of 2026. Now, we're about halfway through and we're picking up speed on a trip that's going to take us back in time and all the way to Independence Hall in Philadelphia. This week, though, we're revisiting the highlights from 2025. We want to help you to bring the spirit of 1776 into 2026. Today, you'll hear from some of the leading experts in their fields on topics that cause considerable controversy, the good and the bad, from our origin story as Americans. They're from a variety of backgrounds and have a variety of perspectives, but what unites them is a passion for preserving the blessings of liberty that are the inheritance of every American, no matter where they were born, who their parents were, what their faith is, or the color of their skin. Citizenship in a republic is demanding. Freedom requires not only a rigorous defense from all enemies, foreign and domestic, but also a knowledgeable and informed populace. It's said that to whom much is given, much is expected, and that is sure for we the people. Unfortunately, our deteriorating shared knowledge of civics and history means that too few Americans are able to participate in this, the world's oldest and most successful experiment in self-government. So we are here at the American Enterprise Institute, where I hang one of my many vocational hats. We are not just here because it's a pretty room with a nice fireplace, but because this project is essential for AEI as well. The scholars here are leading a vigorous exploration and debate about what led to the American founding and what it means today. At the helm of that ship is Robert Doar. He is the president of the American Enterprise Institute, who has generously invited us in and joins us now. Okay, Robert, this is just corny, right? This is just, we're gonna wave some flags and everything.
No, not corny at all. It's
okay.
Essential for us to govern ourselves today. In order to be effective leaders of our country today, we need to know where we come from and what made us great. And the key ingredient to the founding was that the tearing down of hierarchies, giving power to the people and not conveying to people that they were subjects. Mm-hmm. Instead, they were citizens. And that important message is needed today because it's going to be from people that we solve our problems.
I was unprepared in the middle of the previous decade that both the left and the right would sort of veer away from the principles of the founding, right? Nicole Hannah-Jones and the 1619 Project was aimed right at the heart of the American founding to delegitimate the founding of the United States. And then I watched many on the right, the alt-right or far right or whatever, call to question the idea of the American idea, to say that this isn't a creedal nation, that this is a people of blood and soil. And I watched with growing alarm as the things that I had grown up with as normal became subject to attack. Talk about, is this normal? Is this what we should expect, that from time to time people lose faith?
Well, we are a democracy and we believe in free speech. And so we're going to allow for that kind of dissent and difference of opinions. And that's who we are. Sometimes that makes people frustrated and unhappy, but it is part of our greatness, really. The good news is that both of those two perspectives represent, in my opinion, small minority factions on both sides that have loud voices and then can get a lot of attention because they say extreme things. But the vast majority of the American people, I think, understand that our founding was based in real principles, real devotion to all men are created equal, maybe not perfectly achieved at that time or even for a long time, but a path, an effort to get there. And we've made great progress, and it continues to inspire us to make even further progress. So yeah, there are these right and left, and they'll make their noise. But at AEI, at least, we want to speak for the vast majority of Americans that respect our founding and honor it and believe in it as being a world-changing event at that time and still something to be inspired by today.
You and Yuval Levin, who viewers will get to hear from later in this show, undertook this project before it was cool. AEI was, I will say,
We were in early.
We're in early on recognizing the significance for 2026 as a moment for America to have this discussion.
Can I just say that
anything.
that's because at AEI, one of our key principles is we believe in the United States. We believe in our place as a great shining light for the world. And when you believe that, you're going to celebrate our founding.
It's going to get politically weird, though, because we have a president who's going to grab the flag around the spirit of 76, and we're going to have Democrats who say this is no good. How, as Americans enter this space and think about this, and it's obviously, I'm a huge nerd, so it's obviously very important to me, and I care about this all very much. When people are talking about this and they're engaging with this, how do you do it in a way that doesn't feel partisan or political?
Well, we do it in an in-depth way. I mean, we are a think tank, and so we're not going to do something in a shallow way. We're not going to do something that can be summarized in 72-character tweet. We are doing 8 volumes of multiple essays in each volume on major components of our founding. And so for those Americans that really want to study and think and ponder and then be inspired, they should come to us. If they want trite, quick, easy, if they want parades and flags and only parades and flags, then go somewhere else.
Yeah, I was going to say, you're not anti-parade.
I'm not anti-parade.
You don't want to come out and be an anti-parade kind of guy.
I love parades and I love flag. I love the flag. But I think in order to really understand America, you have to apply yourself to studying America.
And the compendium, these volumes that we're putting out that are there are really good and really useful and really thoughtful.
And are going to be distributed in schools and colleges and academic settings. And we have the resources to make them available to the entire country.
50 years ago, the American Enterprise Institute undertook a similar endeavor as it related to the bicentennial. And all of that is part of the legacy here. Mm-hmm. A lot happened in the past 50 years. We've had a very eventful 50 years in the United States. I am just not quite old enough to know what the vibe was in the United States in 1976. But I know from my reading of history that it was a really difficult time. We were coming out of a very difficult time for the country. We had had Watergate, we had had the many miseries of Vietnam, we had had brutal inflation, we had had a lot of unhappiness, political violence for the previous 13 years, going back to the Kennedy assassination. It was a very rough period for the United States. Do you see a parallel here?
Maybe. I mean, I would just say I was 15 years old when I stood on the shore of Brooklyn watching the tall ships come into the harbor. And that was a rough period, but we had actually come out of it.
Okay.
It's sometimes forgotten that at least with the Watergate and impeachment challenge, Congress and the United States resolved that in a way that President Ford could say that we have come through this, proving that our Constitution is still strong. So I think there was a certain confidence that had emerged. Sometimes you guys in the media, all you do is you talk Watergate. You put Watergate, civil rights, strife, and Vietnam in one sentence, and you miss, I think, the details. And I should also say that the civil rights movement had some ups and downs, but it was an enormous achievement in our country. So I think in the eyes of the world, we had earned new respect back then. We now need to do it again.
Right.
Today, I think what I'm really focusing on are 2 big lessons of the founding. One is federalism, the fact that our states' governments and our federal government are not hierarchical. It's not one over the other. They're 2 separate spheres. They're parallel, as Yuval Levin would describe. Mm-hmm. And I think Americans need to come to reacquaint themselves with that and understand that difference. And then the second is the different powers of the presidency and the Congress. And we're having a little struggle with that right now. The president has powers over his branch, but he does not have powers that Congress has. Mm-hmm. And that lesson is something we're going to have an important Supreme Court decision, and you can be sure that in that Supreme Court decision concerning tariffs, which is about to come out, that it will be wallowing in lessons from our founding. And that's what's so great about our founding. It's continuing to teach us lessons, to guide us through difficult policy challenges today, 250 years later.
An owner's manual for citizenship.
There you go.
A little something to keep on hand. Robert Doar, we thank you very much for your time. We appreciate you. When we come back, we'll explore the faith of our forefathers and ask the question, is America a Christian nation? Stay with us as we get ready to bring the spirit of 76 into 26.
Our role is clear. NewsNation has never been more needed. A place where people can come, and we're going to disagree, but with decency. It's about testing ideas, not testing people's patience. Hopefully, that's what we get more of.
The debate is always with us. Is America a Christian nation or a nation of Christians? And as always, the argument is an ugly one. But as we look back to our founding, a couple of things are very clear. First, from the start, Americans prized and protected religious liberty for not just Christian sects, but for Jews, Muslims, and others. The second clear lesson, that the ideas of those Abrahamic religions were central to the American conception of freedom. Those rights endowed by our Creator, not granted by any king or parliament. For the founders, a rightful government would those natural rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, protect, and that any that failed to do so was, by definition, tyrannical. That idea grew in the churches of the 13 colonies. As Reverend Thomas Hooker said in a famous sermon more than a century before the founding, the foundation of authority is laid in the free consent of the people. The choice of public magistrates belongs to the people by God's own allowance. To understand the founders' vision for the nation, we have to understand the faith that gave that vision life. And that's not just an idea for Christians, as you're about to see. Jonathan Rauch would have once been an unlikely person to author a book about the essential connection between religious faith and human rights. When he was a leading figure in the fight over gay marriage 2 decades ago, he famously described himself as an unrepentantly atheistic Jewish homosexual, always pluralistic in his writings for The Atlantic or scholarly work for the Brookings Institution. Few would have foreseen him becoming the author of this, Cross Purposes, Christianity's Broken Bargain with Democracy, which reads almost like, if I dare say, a call for another great awakening. Jonathan Rauch, thank you so much for being here. Let me read you to you. I'm going to start reading you to you. My claim is not just that secular liberalism and religious faith are instrumentally interdependent, but that each is intrinsically reliant on the other to build a morally and epistematically complete and coherent account of the world. What do you mean by that?
I mean that science can give us explanations for the material world, and liberal government, liberal democracy can give us a constitution and processes for resolving our disputes. But they can't give us answers to ultimate questions like, why are we here? They can't give us a fundamental reason to distinguish good from evil. Human beings look to religion from that. I don't have faith, but I've come to think that that's a gift that I lack, not a special thing that I should be praised for. And I've come to see that a lot goes wrong in society when people don't feel they have a grounding for meaning and for morality. So this very important thing, you know, as we're moving up to the 250th anniversary of the founding, perhaps underappreciated in the founding was the cleavage between church and state, and the idea that the state would not have the power of religion over people, and religion would not have the power of force over individuals, and keeping those two things apart, which is super. I hope most people would agree that that's been super for humanity. Excuse me, but it does lead us to a point where, well, let me read you to you again. Liberalism requires us to share power and sometimes relinquish it. It requires us to keep faith with the Constitution even when we aren't winning. The Church of Fear does the opposite. It adheres to political apocalypticism. Every election is Flight 93, a last stand against an existential threat. What do you mean by Flight 93 evangelicism, and why is that a disservice to the Christian church? Well, so this might take 30 or 60 seconds.
Do it. You go.
The founders did not intend to set up America as a Christian nation.
Right.
In fact, they were asked to by Christians, and they specifically refused to put any mention of Christianity, Christ, or Jesus in any of the founding documents. They wanted
more a deistic.
Well, they wanted that separation. They understood that involvement with the state would corrupt the church. But what they did think is that they counted on civil society to provide the grounding, the social glue to keep a diverse country together. They knew the Constitution couldn't provide that.
Right.
So they were counting on schools and families and communities.
A Tocquevillian idea of these.
That's right, and especially the church, which in their day was white Protestant Christianity. So fast forward to almost 250 years, and we're in an era when Christianity, white Protestant Christianity, evangelicalism, which is really what my book is addressed to, it's still the predominant faith in America, in many ways the defining faith. It's taken a different path. It has virtually merged with the Republican Party, and many of its parishioners, even more actually than pastors, really believe there's a war on Christianity, a war on them and their culture and their values and their kids, and that's turning the church into a place of fear. In many cases, they're abandoning the methods, the ideas of Jesus Christ for something much more partisan and political, and that's putting a big strain on the church and also on our democracy.
So Christian writers or writers who are Christian, like Tim Alberta and others, have chronicled this shift and what happened there. Why should these people listen to you, right? Because if Tim Alberta's writing, he's saying, I grew up in the church and I did this. Who are you?
You got me there, Chris. They should not listen to me. I am an atheistic homosexual Jew, or if you prefer, a Jewish homosexual atheist.
However you want to order.
That's what I am. I was made that way by whoever made me. But they should listen to Jesus Christ.
Right.
Jesus, the core of Jesus' teaching is three doctrines. First, don't be afraid, by which he means don't go through life hunkered down in fear. Fear God. Right. But don't let your life be dominated by fear, because then you'll make bad and unwise and irreligious decisions.
Yeah, because we're supposed to know who won. If you're a Christian, you're supposed to believe we know who won.
Well, that's right. And fear of the next election is not what we should be focused on.
Right.
We should be focused on the next world in Christianity.
Right.
His second tenet, be like me. Imitate Jesus. That same attitude toward life. That's not a fear-based attitude. That's an attitude of radical equality and looking after the least of us. It's not about power. And the third thing is forgive each other. Talking about retribution, I am your retribution, that's not the teaching of Jesus. It is for God to make those decisions. So when the church abandoned those things, I'm just saying, the Jesus version of Christianity is better than, I don't know, the political version.
It's a pretty good appeal to authority for a Christian audience, right? You've gone right to the top. But I do think there's a message in your book for non-believers, for non-Christians, for other folks to understand the importance of Christian ideas and ideals in the founding, and why that sort of maybe bland sometimes, but civic faith was essential. Talk about that a little bit, about the other audience.
Chris, that's so important. I'm trying to bring together two audiences in this book, and one of those audiences, frankly, the me of 20 years ago.
Yeah.
The dumbest thing I ever wrote was an article in The Atlantic celebrating secularization. I called it apathyism. This is now 22 years ago, and I thought, with the decline of organized religion and Christianity, we'll be like Scandinavia. We'll have less conflict, less dogmatism.
You knew what my next question was going to be.
Boy, was I ever wrong. All the social indicators on things like loneliness, anxiety, depression, community, isolation have all gone the wrong direction as the church has gone under. So I have to look at myself and fellow secular liberals and say, we did not understand that Christianity, not just religion, but Christianity in our country is a load-bearing wall for our democracy. And when it caves in, when it can't do that job of grounding our society in the morality of Jesus, no one else can do that as well.
Oh man, so and by the way, anybody who's never read the Constitution of Knowledge should. It would be malpractice not to mention what a good and important book that is. We have to go, but I want you to tell me about Mark McIntosh, which bookends this book and brought you the real connection in here. Talk about this guy.
So my journey begins when I'm 18 years old. I'm paired up with a college roommate. I am, at that point, a militant atheist, one of those obnoxious people who's always going around arguing with Christians. But that's because, you know, I was a young gay kid and Christianity had no place for me.
Yeah.
Mark was also 18, a person of deep Christian faith who is the first person who showed me how Christianity actually can shape a person's entire life. And he had a sense of humor, he could be bawdy, sarcastic, bad mood, all of those things. He was a human being, but he was a Christian human being. And that was the first time that I saw, wait a minute, there's something here beyond hypocrisy and cruelty. And that was a turning point.
Jonathan Rauch, thank you for this great book. Thank you for helping us be smarter as we head into USA 250. We thank you very much.
Thank you.
There's still much more to come in our special Spirit of 26 episode. When we return, we'll pull a golden thread from the founding to the hallowed ground of Gettysburg. Stay with us.
NewsNation is bringing more Americans together.
The appetite is greater than it has ever been for perspective, for understanding, and for information that they can not just trust, but use.
NewsNation. News for all Americans.
Benjamin Banneker was born to free black parents in Baltimore in 1730. He was a naturalist, an astronomer, and most notably a surveyor who helped draw the lines of the District of Columbia in 1791 at the behest of then Secretary of State Thomas Jefferson. This led to correspondence between Banneker and Jefferson in which Banneker held up Jefferson's sentiments that all men are created equal to the horrors of slavery. Sir, Banneker wrote, how pitiable it is to reflect that although you were so fully convinced of the benevolence of the Father of mankind and of his equal and impartial distribution of those rights and privileges which he had conferred upon them, that you should at the same time counteract his mercies in detaining by fraud and violence so numerous a part of my brethren under groaning captivity and cruel oppression, that you should at the same time be found guilty of that most criminal act which you professedly detested in others with respect to yourselves. It would take 7 decades and a civil war to begin to answer that charge, which is why our discussion of the founding takes us now to the fields of central Pennsylvania. In July 1863, word reached Washington that Union forces had won decisive victories at both Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, and Vicksburg, Mississippi. Cheering crowds marched up Pennsylvania Avenue and called on President Abraham Lincoln to give a speech. In his impromptu remarks, the president said, "How long ago is it? 80-odd years since the 4th of July? For the first time in the history of the world, a nation by its representatives assembled and declared as a self-evident truth that all men are created equal." Does that sound a little familiar to you? 4 months later, when Lincoln stood on the stage in Gettysburg to dedicate a national cemetery for the men who had died there, he picked up on that theme, but perhaps in language a little more magisterial. It was 77 years, not 80-odd years, and it was our fathers on this continent, not a nation by its representatives, but the spirit was the same. A nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. As that nation prepares to celebrate 250 years of independence, we should acknowledge the role that victory in the Civil War and Abraham Lincoln himself had on cementing the principles of the founding and reshaping them too. And there's no better time to consider the importance of Gettysburg than today as we approach the 162nd anniversary of that speech this week. And I will tell you one thing for sure, there is no person better for that work than Allen Guelzo, professor of humanities at the University of Florida. And I will tell you right now, the most esteemed Lincoln scholar alive today. Professor, thank you so much for being with us. How did Lincoln's speech...
Well, thank you.
How did Lincoln's speech, certainly humble compared to the great orators of the day, go over? And I don't mean just as a performance piece, but this big idea that the purpose of the Civil War was the abolition of slavery. I know the Emancipation Proclamation from earlier that year had not been, shall we say, uncritically received by many in the North.
There is a legend out there that Lincoln's speech at Gettysburg was not well received, that it went over very badly, People didn't even realize that Lincoln was finished when it was over. There was an awkward silence, a little smattering applause, and Lincoln is supposed to have turned to one of his associates, Ward Hill Lamon, and said, "That speech won't scour." Well, Ward Lamon told a lot of tall tales about his association with Lincoln, and everything that we have been able to find out from people who were there at the time, from the reporters, the journalists who were there covering the event, was that the response of the people was immediate, and it was enthusiastic. And not only for the people there, but as soon as the transcript of Lincoln's comments was published the following day in newspapers across the country, an immediate response. Henry Wadsworth Longfellow read it over breakfast and sat down to write to his own editor and say, Lincoln's comments are simply sublime. So it made a mark right away within a year. Within a year, it was being anthologized in school textbooks for kids in school to memorize. So the impact of that address, even though it's only 272 words long, was lasting. It was immediate.
I tell people all the time, no one has ever said it was a good political speech, but I wish it had been longer. If only they had gone on a little longer. Abraham Lincoln definitely set the mark on the idea of this new birth of freedom, on this idea of saying what the point of the Civil War was. How receptive were people to that, and how significant was that?
One senator from Massachusetts, Charles Sumner, made a comment that I thought spoke for a great many people. He said that Lincoln at Gettysburg had made the remark that the world would little note nor long remember what was said there. And Sumner said, on that point, Lincoln could not have been more wrong. Not only will people note, not only will they remember, but, Sumner added, that speech was even more important than the military victory that was won at Gettysburg, because it articulated in the clearest and the most succinct fashion what was at stake in the American Civil War.
There's a view of Abraham Lincoln by some, and I think of Richard Brookhiser and others, who describe Lincoln as sort of the last founding father, or the end of the age of formation for the United States. And that what he was doing there at Gettysburg and in his second inaugural and in so much of his work was saying, this is the point. This is why we are here. Does that scour with you? Does the idea of Abraham Lincoln as the coda or the defining end of the founding era, how does that sit?
I think Lincoln saw himself very much as an heir of the founders. And the work that he was doing as president was the preservation of the Revolution and the Revolution's principles. Lincoln was very, very conscious that the United States in the 1860s, in the midst of war, was really the only large-scale democracy still on its feet after the age of revolutions at the end of the 18th century. And every aristocracy in Europe, every king, every dictator, every whatnot, were counting on the Confederacy to win this war and thus show that democracy doesn't work. Nice idea, but look, it's impractical. Even the Americans couldn't make a go of it. And Lincoln understands that what has to happen is that for the idea of government of the people, by the people, for the people, there's going to have to be a victory that justifies that. And if that happens, then the hinge on which American history turns from the past and faces the future with a renewed commitment to that fundamental birth of freedom, in this case, a new birth of freedom that is going to carry Americans into the future.
Professor, I will not let you go without praising your latest book, The Golden Thread, A History of the Western Tradition. This is just the first volume, and it covers the ancient world and early Christendom. This is a gorgeous text, and I cannot recommend it to people enough. It is beautiful and really, really well done and really accessible. So before you leave us, pull that golden thread for us, if you will, from the birth of the West at the beginning to Abraham Lincoln.
What Lincoln is talking about at Gettysburg, and in some respects is talking about just for almost all of his life, is this idea that ordinary people are capable of governing themselves. Human beings are not simply to be divided into a class of people who are incapable of running their own affairs, while there's another class of people who are born, booted and spurred, and ready to ride on the backs of everyone else. No. That was not the movement of the golden thread. And Lincoln will appear, you won't be surprised at this, in Volume 2, as one of those who articulates this idea beautifully and in the most direct and easily comprehensible language. This is government of the people, by the people, for the people. For Lincoln, what he is pulling on with that golden thread is a thread of connection which has gone all the way back to the days of the Roman Republic, all the way back to the great age of democracy in Athens. And even though he, as he admitted, even though he doesn't read Latin and doesn't read Greek, he is also very conscious of the inheritance that he carries forward. And it's an inheritance that, in the crisis of the Civil War, was receiving its greatest and most challenging test.
Professor Allen Guelzo, I am envious of your students, but grateful for your books. Thank you very much for being with us today. What would the founders advise for our own struggles of strife and disunity? In our next segment, we have answers. Stay with us as the Spirit of 26 rolls on.
The more we dig into this story, the wilder it gets.
I'm with NewsNation. No comment?
A NewsNation investigation.
It does appear that this is a very organized scheme in multiple states.
What'd you think about that?
I was horrified.
I applaud NewsNation for doing some tremendous investigative reporting. That's what we need. We have to have a curious media.
This is the place that digs deeper for all Americans. Trust NewsNation.
While the world took note of the American Revolution, it was seen by many at the time as an extension of the global conflict between Britain and France, the 7 Years' War, or the French and Indian War to North Americans. Before that war began, American colonists faced near constant threat from French ambitions. It was one of the few things beyond their common kingship that united the residents of the 13 colonies strung along 1,300 miles of Atlantic coastline. Benjamin Franklin, the famous publisher and inventor, made the idea of common defense his cause. It failed at first, but Franklin's exhortation to the colonies took on new meaning as the Revolution approached. Join or die, he said. Then, as now, unity on the few essential points was hard for a nation so diverse and far-flung. Certainly 2025 had hard lessons for us about those challenges and the need to overcome them. Our next conversation points us in that direction.
I'll just conclude with words I share often from a friend and author, Yuval Levin, who was asked if he was optimistic about our country. And he said, I'm not optimistic. He said, I hate optimism. God, that sounds bad. But he said, optimism is a vice. It's this idea that good things are just going to happen. He said, in the history of the world, good things have never just happened. He says, I'm not optimistic, but I am hopeful.
That was Utah Governor Spencer Cox in the press conference announcing the capture of the accused assassin of Charlie Kirk. And that hopeful anti-optimist he mentioned is our next guest. Please welcome Yuval Levin. He is a senior fellow and director of social, cultural, and constitutional studies at the American Enterprise Institute, where he also happens to be my boss. He is the founder and editor of National Affairs magazine and author most recently of American Covenant, How the Constitution Unified Our Nation and Could Again. Now, this is a conversation that we wanted to have ahead of Constitution Day, which is on Wednesday, as part of our ongoing series about the 250th anniversary of our founding, which we will celebrate in July. But obviously, there's a different context for this conversation now. But I want to start with this wonderful line from the speech you gave for Constitution Day last year, which can be had, you can also get that in book form from the Walter Burns Constitution Day lectures. The breakdown of political culture in our day is not a function of our having forgotten how to agree with each other, but a function of our having forgotten how to disagree constructively. And this is what our Constitution can better enable us to do, Mr. Levin. When you talk about functional disagreement, and we heard Spencer Cox talk about your famous quotes about hope versus optimism, unpack for us.
Well, look, the challenge we face now as a divided society is not fundamentally a challenge about how do we stop disagreeing with each other. It's a challenge about how do we functionally disagree? How do we disagree in a way that points towards some solution, towards some arrangement and agreement? And that requires a kind of structured disagreement that starts from the premise that the people we disagree with are still going to be here tomorrow. I think that's the premise we're having trouble with. A lot of our politics now is built around the unstated hope that if we just work hard enough, these people are going to go away. And that is not happening. The Constitution starts from the premise that that is not happening and helps us work through differences in a way that allows them to become tractable, negotiable, and ultimately to allow us to arrive at a conclusion that we can all tolerate. That's a low bar, it's low expectations, it's rooted in pessimism, but it is the best way to arrange a free society that human beings have ever come up with.
So the miracle of the Constitution could rightly be said, I think, that it takes a realistic view of human nature, right? It acknowledges that what is the line? If
men were angels, there would be no need
of government. So it acknowledges the reality of that, and it also acknowledges that if people are flawed, if humanity, the crooked timber of humanity is what it is, we can't put people in a position to rule over other people because those people are people too. But you are a hopeful person, right? So you have a view typical of, I think, American conservatism about human nature, and yet you are a hopeful person. How do you do that?
I'm ultimately hopeful because we do have our constitutional system that is rooted in that premise and that helps us as imperfect people find our way toward productive solutions to common problems. And as long as we do allow ourselves to be governed by that system, there are ways for us to live together. Hopeful doesn't mean everything's going to be perfect. Hopeful means that we can overcome the biggest problems we have. And ultimately, I think that neither optimism nor pessimism is the way to be a citizen in a republic, because those are both passive. They're both ways of saying, what's going to happen is going to happen. We'll see. Hope says to you, if you work at it, if you make yourself worth it and worthy of it, then you can achieve a better life. I think that is the promise of America, and it's a promise our country's kept for a long time, and I do have hope that we'll continue to keep it.
One of the things, and I cannot, I'm going to just keep holding this book up because everybody should buy this book. I cannot recommend this book enough because of its accessibility, its utility for young people. I've given away many copies of this book, but it's not just for young people. It is a very practical, useful application of how the Constitution was conceived, how it works, and all of those things. But it's not working now, right? Because that building behind us, and I'm not blaming Congress.
I am. I'm blaming Congress.
Well, I am blaming Congress for a lot of things, but I'm not blaming Congress for the rise in political violence.
Yeah.
But I am saying that if the system does not yield results, if the grievances of the people cannot find redress, over and over and over again. If I think you're the one who's talked about the idea of Congress, that one of its functions in the body politic is to cleanse the blood so that we can deal with these things. And if Congress doesn't deal with conflicts as it's constitutionally mandated to do, then we don't get fresh starts and we can't ever move on from anything.
I think this is another way to see the centrality of a certain kind of structured conflict in our system. There is intended to be conflict in the constitutional system. The American system is kept in balance, not like a roof that has beams that are laid over each other. It's dynamic. It's meant to be always pushing and pulling. And so in a moment when there's a lot of pushing from one of the branches of our government, the others have to do their job too. I think we're used to seeing a lot of titanic struggles now between the president and the courts. And so it's hard for us to see that it's the dog that isn't barking. It's the institution that isn't moving that is really at the core of the problem here. An assertive president would not have surprised the framers of the Constitution. A court that wants more power would not have surprised them. A Congress that doesn't want to do its job is a mystery. And I think that addressing that problem, changing the incentives that face members, helping the institution take on its central role, its primary role in the system, is really the constitutional challenge now.
All right, last thing. Help us to think about and understand how unusual the Constitution is in world history, that this is, I guess, a singular achievement. Am I gilding the lily if I say that it's a singular achievement?
You know, there's a kind of fashion in political science to say, look at the small European democracies. They're so much simpler. They're so much more
Always
democratic.
The Swiss. Always.
Yeah, the Swiss, the Norwegians. The fact is, the United States is not like Switzerland or Norway. The United States is like India. It's like Brazil. It's massive. It's immensely diverse. But it is ultimately governed better than those other democracies. They have their virtues too. But for 235 years now, we've had this system of government allowing this amazingly dynamic, constantly fighting with itself society to hold together. And I think we should not underestimate its capacity to get us through this moment too. It is unique, and it's our gift. We should be grateful for it.
Yeah, we have the advantage in the United States, and when we don't know what to do, we can go back to the source code.
That's right.
And the source code can help. Yuval Levin, my friend, my boss, somebody whose book you should buy. We appreciate you. Hut, hike your way to some revolutionary history. Your almanac is next. Stay with us.
Every weeknight on News Nation, Blake Berman brings you the biggest stories from the top newsmakers in Washington.
This economy is going to continue to get better.
This is not the end of this.
You have to be able to acknowledge the economy is not working.
This is good for show politically.
The Hill with Blake Berman, weeknights at 6/5 Central. News for all Americans.
This is your almanac for today, December 28th, 2025, your last almanac of 25. On this day in 1958, 45 million Americans tuned in to the NFL championship game between the Baltimore Colts and the New York Giants, a game that would go down in the history books as the greatest game ever played. In the first half, the Colts commanded a 14-3 lead that quickly gave way to the New York Giants, making a monumental 17-14 comeback in the second half. But the iconic play of the game in the final minutes, when the Colts quarterback Johnny Unitas orchestrated a 73-yard drive that led the Colts to a field goal to tie the game. And to cap off the first championship, to reach sudden death overtime, Unitas led the Colts to one more touchdown to win the title. It was a night that would catapult the game to become an American obsession, shaped by the growing number of Americans tuning in to their newly obtained home televisions. But the 20th century Americans were not the only ones who had their own sports pastimes. Nearly 200 years prior, an early version of the game had already taken hold among British colonists in America. Football, as it was also known back then, was a street game using an inflated pig bladder, more closely resembling what we know today as rugby or soccer. While it would have been another century for the sport to evolve into the modern American game, it was enjoyed by many in the colonies, including America's first fighting force. In fact, future Lady Abigail Adams in 1777 was concerned about the hold the sport had taken over the Continental soldiers and wrote to her husband and future President John Adams, quote, "This continent has paid thousands to officers and men who have been loitering about playing football and ninepins and doing their own private business whilst they ought to have been defending our forts. So whatever you're putting off until 2026, we hope your new year is revolutionary. Until next time.